My name's Ben Jenkins, and I lead NobleProg UK, Ireland, Netherlands, and Portugal. Hopefully, we've got something of real value for you this afternoon. A little bit about NobleProg. We are a leading training and consultancy organisation. We think that we have real expertise in Agile and Scrum, and that's because we've been trusted to deliver training to government clients via our friends at KPMG for many years, in fact. And we're currently working with local digital to deliver digital and agile training to local authorities up and down the country, many of whom, in fact, we're very pleased to welcome and are represented by attendees today. Let me introduce our NobleProg experts. You'll be hearing first from Craig. Craig may in fact be known to some of you if you have attended some of those digital training events. He is a highly respected trainer, consultant, and speaker. He is in fact a leading voice on digital and agile transformation in UK government. And his track record for highly impactful training is quite honestly first class. Delegates often comment in feedback forms for NobleProg events that his training is the best they have ever attended. And I think that probably says more than anything else. After Craig, you'll hear from Jakub, and we'll hand the mic over to him. Jakub is a Scrum.org world leading trainer, and he's successfully delivered certified courses to scores of UK government delegates spanning many departments. He is undoubtedly internationally respected and highly passionate about the power of agile transformation. Both of our NobleProg experts have a proven record acquired over many years for delivering successful outcomes. So I think you'll agree with me that we are all in very safe hands today.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you very much for the kind words of introduction. As mentioned, I'm Craig. I'm a trainer for NobleProg based in the northeast of England. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance, and for those who have been on one of my training courses, great to see you along again. I've been delivering training for NobleProg for around 7 years now, not exclusively in the public sector, but quite a lot in the central government and local government space in this digital and agile area. And what I found while delivering this training is that lots of government departments are facing similar challenges in terms of how they progress their digital agenda. And that's what I'd like to share with you all now. And then we can talk about how techniques like Scrum can really help overcome some of those challenges. Okay, in the courses themselves, a good way of finding out information is to do what we call a retrospective. As Jakub will illustrate later, a retrospective is a key event in Scrum, but it was applied in this case just to try and uncover what was working well, but also the challenges that were being faced in public sector digital delivery. And there were some very, very common themes. And I suppose the message here is you are not alone. If you are going through digital delivery in the public sector, quite a few of these challenges will possibly resonate with you. And as we'll see later, we can talk about Scrum as an agile technique for helping you overcome those challenges. But what are those challenges? Well, one of the common ones we were seeing in pretty much every retro is this consideration of users and their needs. As you'll see from this whiteboard that I'm sharing with you now, at the top left there was two elements of bringing users on the journey to digital. First of all, the user needs were not being fully considered at the start, but also when digital solutions were being put in place, there was little consideration of the impact of those users expected to work with those digital solutions. And this was quite a thing, really, because in the UK in particular, we have a government digital standard, the first pillar of which is to understand user needs. Yet time and time again, the evidence was telling us that we weren't embracing that pillar fully, and that we weren't fully engaging with users who were impacted by this digital transformation. And because our users weren't involved, or they were unwilling or reluctant to get involved or to use some of our digital solutions, we found that scope kept changing because we had to. If the digital solutions we were building and deploying didn't satisfy what our users needed, then changes obviously needed to be made to make those digital services more suitable. And we were hearing all about the scope creep that was involved in that. As user needs weren't fully discovered, and as we discovered those needs, we found that the scope we had in place at the start of what we were looking to deliver was just unfit for purpose. And as a consequence of that, we quite often saw that there was an impact on any time considerations. In the public sector in particular, time and budget are key drivers. There may be legislative deadlines driven by central or local government decision makers. When user needs were incorrectly assumed, and that had an impact on scope, it obviously then had an impact on any timeline that was in place. And this was all generating a lot of friction, a lot of heat. And people were calling this out, that these dates, these timelines, these budgets just weren't, accommodating this move towards digital. And we had to do something about that. The other area that was pinpointed as a common challenge was trying to get communication at the right level so that it was fit for purpose. Now, sometimes this manifests itself from those earlier challenges. If we don't understand our users, if we don't understand scope, if we start to miss deadlines, then sometimes there is a tendency not to communicate, to actually communicate less, to hide some of the bad news, in that, if anything, caused more angst, more concerns amongst users, because they were in this state of flux. So it really is important that we get communication at the right level, to the right people, at the right time, irrespective of the message you are delivering, whether it's a good message or a bad message. We want to be transparent in this move towards digital, and we want to just keep our users and our stakeholders fully communicated with. Having the right people was also a problem, because you can have a whole mix of people in your teams delivering against digital. And we just want to make sure that they have the skills needed to be able to deliver what is required. And this was highlighted as a constant challenge. Not every time, but in a number of areas, not having the right people in the room, not having the right people in the team, or not having the right people available to those teams to answer questions became another challenge. So getting skills into the team, having the right team mix, and having access to other people that you need access to was also a constant challenge. The first retro was from a large central government department. This second one came more from a local authority, but you will see some commonality across all of these retros. And that was what was jumping out when we delivered these training courses, that, as I mentioned, you aren't alone. These are common problems with common pitfalls that we have potentially through Scrum and Agile ways of dealing with them. So change as a constant. Now, things are constantly changing, whether it's from within in terms of what you thought you were going to deliver, or externally in terms of budget changes. We are living in a complex and uncertain world. And if anything, the world is getting even more complex and more uncertain. And we have to deal with that uncertainty as best we can. Things are beyond our control. Budgets are changing. Policymakers are doing U-turns and making different decisions. That constant state of flux is something that lots and lots of authorities were calling out as a challenge. And that obviously then has a knock-on impact. It's like another domino hitting another domino. If you have all of these changes coming to you, then the scope of what you were looking to deliver needs to change. Yeah, things you thought you needed to do had to change. So constant change resulted in scope constantly changing, which then meant any plans we had in place started to drift. Many organizations in the public sector still have a key plan goal. Everything needs to be planned for the long term. And what we were constantly finding is those plans became out of date. As change happened and scope began to creep and to vary, then things we thought we were going to do just needed to change. And sometimes in the public sector, these plans we tried to force on teams. We tried to be too restrictive by saying we needed to stick to the plan rather than being cognizant of that changing world around us. The other area was people. Again, local authorities, central government, having access to the right people, being able to bring the right people in, having the team set up in the right way was a constant challenge. I know we are in an environment where training and recruitment and retention is one of our biggest challenges. Skills shortages are still a thing, and this manifested itself in so many digital teams. Having access to the right people was a key challenge. And then we had stakeholder expectations. We had a lot of stakeholders who thought they were going to get something from digital transformation, and actually what was delivered wasn't in line with what they expected. And that, again, is part of the wider problem of change, of living in an uncertain world, of projects that we thought were going in one direction that had to change to go in another direction. We obviously need to keep our stakeholders involved in that. We have to give them the background as to why things change. And we just ultimately need to keep them communicated and on side. And sometimes stakeholders just didn't like the surprises. Yeah, they weren't privy to some of the reasons why things had to change. They didn't see why project plans were different and why scope was changing. And they had quite a negative reaction to that. And I suppose what we want to try and do is just try and change that perception of change. We should look at change as a more positive thing. It should be a good thing, because when change happens, it's usually for the right reasons. Yet we want to deliver in this digital world the right solutions for the right people at the right time. And if we are delivering the wrong stuff, then we just need to change. Irrespective of our scope, irrespective of our plans, irrespective of our stakeholder expectations, we should embrace change so that we deliver in digital the right thing. It does cause problems at a portfolio level as well. And by portfolio, I mean in authorities, both local and central, we have strategies in place. Yeah. And we need to just make sure that what we deliver in digital reflects what we have in our strategy. And sometimes those strategies were just unrealistic. And as I'm calling out there, at the portfolio level, there were just some unrealistic expectations as to what could be delivered, quite often driven by unrealistic stakeholder expectations, quite often driven by ministers or councillors, key decision makers in our authorities. So trying to balance our portfolio of what we want to do strategically in this digital space and what is happening day to day in a team, we just had a big disconnect between those. And risk management is key throughout all of this. A lot of people came onto the courses that we were running, and the perception of agile was that it was high risk, that it was a risky thing to work with. It was a different way of doing things. And they were quite surprised when we talked about how agile techniques actually help you manage risk in a more effective way, because dealing with risk is a key part of spending, what is in effect public money. Whenever you do any digital work in the public sector, it's funded by taxpayers, and we just want to make sure that we spend that money accordingly. We want to manage the risk that we deliver the wrong things. And a lot of people came out of the course, thinking that agile was high risk, and they went away with a new understanding that agile is actually about managing risk more effectively. Okay, the final retro I'd like to share with you is another local authority one. Really is just emphasizing some of the key points I've been making, just really to show the commonality of some of these themes. Things we've touched on around users, user needs, their needs being misunderstood, not doing enough user research, yet not understanding the impact on our users, which manifested itself in scope constantly needing to change, outcomes differing from what was originally expected, which meant that plans and deadlines were impacted, by that. Again, you're detecting common threads here. They're all interrelated because as you need, as plans change and as scope changes, money starts to become an issue. Sometimes having a fixed budget for something and that needing to change was causing issues. People and having the right people involved, skills, a common theme. And we also have stakeholder involvement, executive sponsorship, communications, lots of interrelated areas that consistently people coming on these courses were finding were a problem. So just to summarize those key themes before we start talking about what we can do in Agile and in Scrum in particular to tackle those, are getting clarity on user needs. You need to understand first and foremost what your user needs are. And those users could be internal or external users, depending on where in digital you are operating. Okay. On the back of that, we need to then more intrinsically manage scope and changes. Change the perception of change in particular. So it's not a bad thing. Change should be viewed as a good thing. We also want to then have more effective planning and time management. Planning and time management that reflects the changing world in which we live, which reflects the changing scope that comes when we deal with complex stakeholder and user needs, as well as keeping our funding and budget under control, because we have to spend public money wisely. Okay, communication at the right level to the right people at the right time with the right message is also important, and getting the right people and skills into our teams so that we can actually deliver against this digital agenda was the other challenge. Now, I'm not sure if we can do this. We were planning on running a poll, but I think in Teams, in Zoom, we've had a bit of a technical challenge, but I was going to ask you if any of those problems resonate with you, because I'm sure, as I've mentioned, you're not alone in this space. If you're doing anything in this digital space, then those challenges may be something that you can relate to. You may have challenges of your own that are different, and please do, if you want, put them into the chat. Let us know what kind of challenges you are facing over and above those ones I've shared. If you are facing similar challenges, then also please do call them out in the chat box, just to let us know that what we're going to cover next is what you are interested in, because now is the time I was going to hand over to Jakub and just say, right, Scrum, this thing called Scrum, how can this help with some of these topics? So Jakub, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I also have to say that I'm very thankful for Ben. He was really kind when he introduced me. Now I will share my my screen. Craig, if you could stop sharing your screen, then I can continue. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, voila. One moment, please. Okay, so I must tell you that apart from being trainer, I'm also a consultant. So usually my answer to any kind of question, it depends. And about getting clarity on user needs, it's a little bit similar. So I can't start just answering these questions Craig mentioned before right away. I need to add some additional ideas that are crucial in understanding a lot of things we will cover later. So first of all, I don't know if there is any person in this room who actually speak Welsh. Nevertheless, in Welsh, and what are you facing similar? Yes, there is a very, very important model called so-called Cynefin or Cynefin. It's from Welsh language, as I mentioned before, created by Joe Snowden. It helps us to understand reality much better. So actually in this model, we have 5 different types of reality, 5 different types of environments when we create the product. So Cynefin, as I had, or Cynefin means ecosystem or this environment. So let's start with, let's say the easiest one, so-called simple. In simple environment, we can say that our prediction is very, very high and complexity of this environment is very low. So let's imagine your product is so-called hot dog. So according to fulfilling needs and expectations, you're just asking your customer what this customer wants, and you just do it right away in a, let's say, just-in-time approach. So it's no-brainer here. You just do it. Nevertheless, situation is a little more complicated in environment so-called complicated. So let's imagine that we would like to buy a bridge. So in this situation, our complexity, the complexity of this environment is huge, it's enormous. Nevertheless, in this environment, 2 + 2 = 4 all the time. So we have high predictability also. So if you want to buy a bridge, so what can we do? We can use so-called waterfall approach. It's just perfect here. So waterfall is just amazing solution right now in this particular situation. So we can just check what are needs and expectations of our users. So let's say we want to build a bridge that connects to villages, both are on the different sides of river. So we just ask people what they really need, what they want. We can do some research, etc. Nevertheless, what is important here? Extremely important fact is that it will probably not change in few years. So people need to spare a lot of time to find another bridge that is, I don't know, 30 miles away. So they spend a lot of fuel, a lot of time, a lot of other resources, but their need will not change fast. So after that, what we should do, we should have clear design of this bridge so we can create, let's say, model of final product before we start building it. So every even smallest part of the bridge can be planned in advance. So probably nothing will change, nothing, let's say, seriously. So the technology for building a bridge is known for us. So so probably we have experience in this kind of products, so we can just plan it. And also needs will not change. So that is why there probably we will need not much change in the design, in the model. And then we can just build it. And after we build it, it will provide value. Of course, if we done our homework, right? That's obvious. Nevertheless, what is important? Here, the best strategy to fulfill needs and expectations of our users is to create a big batch of value. So from economical perspective, that's the best solution. So we just build everything and we give it to our users. And probably they will just be very happy with that. Nevertheless, guys, what is really important is that reality is not always like that. Sometimes we have to face different challenges. So in Cynefin or Cynefin model, it's so-called complex. In complex environment, usually we have something to do with people. So what is important? So people are very emotional, unpredictable. So they're changing their mind all the time. So we might say that apart from having high complexity, we have very low predictability. Your users will tell you one thing after a few days, they can change it. Even after a few months, might be disaster for your, let's say, waterfall projects. And apart from that, you can't trust your users. So that's very funny because they're telling one thing and doing other thing. So you need to have, let's say, confirmation or your research from let's say, a declarative perspective, so you can ask them, but also you need confirmation from behavioral perspective. So they behave different, they declare. And apart from that, even if you know behavior of your customers, they might stop using your application because unknown reasons. I don't know even what can be the problem. So what I'm trying to say right now, that it's very difficult because this low predictability. We need to have much more, let's say, contact with reality. We need a lot of confirmations. So if we compare this complex environment with this previous one, complicated, when we build a bridge, we also had to be aware that technology is a huge problem in creating products. So in technology of building bridge, so there is much more predictability, as I mentioned before. So software is changing all the time. So whenever you build a product, probably you're using the newest set of frameworks from different angles, etc. And actually, it's extremely difficult to predict what will go wrong. So that is why we need a solution that will help us to validate a lot of technical, but also business hypotheses. We need to have much more contact with reality. And if you want to use the waterfall approach in complex environment, we will encounter the even different problem. So very often when we work in waterfall approach, we have so-called phases with different peoples, with different skills. And actually, so Ben introduced me as a trainer, but I'm also a consultant. I help in different areas, in corporations, in public sector, in small startups. Nevertheless, everywhere is the same problem. The problem is that each, let's say, silo understands the final product a little bit different. So, you know, the vision of the product, let's say the shape of the product is changing during each let's say silo when it's moved from one silo to another. So it is high danger that even if we made the research of user needs right, the final product will not be something that fulfills needs and expectation of our users. So actually it's a disaster. Nevertheless, even if we will not encounter these kind of problems, even if we make our research of user needs perfectly, still user needs are changing over the time. So that's very important, that's crucial. So I was a witness of this kind of situation, that we built a product that was just perfect 2 years ago, but now we have different challenges. So the law might change, a lot of things might change, and users might start using some newer technology, and actually we built something that is obsolete. So that might be terrible. And guys, let's do something about it. So before I will answer the question, I need even more, you know, beating around the bush. So let's imagine for a moment that you put your hand on a hot stove. So probably you will feel a lot of pain, but what is good about this pain? Probably you will move your hand right away to, let's say, to solve this problem, to prohibit you from having very, very serious issues with your tissue. Okay, it's all right. So nevertheless, what is important? All agile approach or Scrum approach is like a nervous system. Actually, it will not help you with some, I don't know, it's not a silver bullet. It will not give you some, you know, some solutions that will just solve all your problems. But it will help you for sure with feeling the pain. You will know exactly that there is something wrong about technology, that there is something wrong about user needs, about fulfilling needs and expectations, etc., etc., etc. So Scrum can be treated, or Agile, as a set of the huge number of feedback loops. It gives you the contact with reality. If you build a bridge, you don't need so much feedback loops. But when you are in complex environment, you need them a lot. And Scrum and Agile will help you with that. So we might say that Scrum and Agile is extremely, extremely empirical. So building a bridge or using waterfall, it's predictive approach. So you predict the future and you build your product. And if you did your job right, everything should be fine. Nevertheless, in complex world, it's much more challenging. You need to have the feedback that you are going in the right direction very, very often. You need to inspect and adapt the reality. You need to know what is the reality, and you need to know what to do to make it better for you from different perspectives. So you can inspect and adapt your process of delivering software. So it's not so obvious that, that sometimes when I work with my customers, we change our process 5 times in 2 years. I'm talking about major changes because we encounter new problems, new challenges, and we have to do it. It was good for the final product, and also scope should be changed. So one of generals I don't really remember who was he. Probably he was some German field marshal, said something like that, that no plan survives contact with an enemy. So it's the same with the scope. No scope survives contact with your users because they will give you new feedback. So probably heard about Mike Tyson, this American ex-boxer. So he said it's in a little bit less polite words that everybody has a plan until it's punched into a face. So it's the same with your scope. When you start building your product, you will encounter problems that you could not even imagine, and you have to react accordingly. And also the same, it's with the flow of value. So I'm, apart from being Scrum enthusiast and trainer, I'm also Kanban trainer. So I see any kind of work as a work item that go through the flow of value. So this flow of value can be changed also. You can add steps, remove steps, etc., to gain more value. And also your team composition might change. You might encounter new problems with new skills might be necessary. So you have to change the team composition, inspect and adapt it. And of course, technology is key here. So sometimes you might find out that performance of your application is far below the expectations of users and your customers. So what can you do? You should make an adjustment, inspect and adapt technology, and of course, ways of working. But what is also very important, sometimes people forget about it. So very often people think that we should adjust our scope to fulfill our goals. But guys, sometimes also our goals should change. So user needs might change over the time. So we should also inspect and adapt them. And also, when we have some product vision, some product strategy, we also, of course, only from time to time, do some pivots. We should not just go blindly in some direction. Maybe this direction should be a little bit different. So that's very important. And what is also very important about agile approach in comparison to waterfall approach is that we don't use big batch of value. So when you build a bridge, probably you will build the whole bridge and give it to your users. So this is a huge portion of a product value. So maybe it's sometimes better to work with smaller batches of value. So you can use rather spoon than huge hamburger. And what is important here, guys, that when you use small batch of value, a lot of interesting things might happen. So for example, you can deliver your value faster. The cost of delay is much lower. So when you deliver the product to your users, even if it's not complete, I mean, there is only part of it, but usable, something that provides value to them, they will be happy. They will start using it faster. And also what is very important, you will start delivering in more predictable way. That's very important. When I work with my customers and we optimize processes of the companies, so we think about three things: to deliver faster, to deliver more, and to deliver in more predictable way. It's extremely important when you work in let's say waterfall approach in complex environment. You are never sure when you deliver the product. And I'm not saying that in agile approach you know exactly when it will be delivered. Nevertheless, there is much more predictability in that with that tools like Scrum or agile on the other things. And what is even more important, you have very short feedback loops. You know right away about any problems with technology. So I will talk about it a little bit later. Nevertheless, it's extremely important to know that you're doing something wrong. So you will feel the pain right away. So imagine that you put your hand on the hot stove once again, but you will feel the pain after 2 weeks. So probably you will not react fast enough. So you need to feel the pain right away when you're doing something wrong, of course, and the pleasure if you're doing something correctly. Yeah, and I already mentioned about the value. And actually now we can define what is Scrum actually. So first of all, we need to understand that Scrum is a framework. So when I conducted Scrum training in London for public sector a few weeks ago or 4 months ago, I don't really remember, one of students gave me the great explanation of what framework is. So he said that, hey, after what you tell us, Jacob, about it, so it appears that Scrum is like a skeleton, and you need to add flesh to this skeleton, and then you will have the whole body. Exactly. So Scrum is just a skeleton. Scrum will not give you all answers, all tools. You need to add them. You need to adjust them to your needs. So Scrum is nothing if you not add complementary practices to that. So you need to add a lot of things to Scrum. Nevertheless, Scrum will give you some direction, will give you exact answers. How can it be done? Nevertheless, you need to do a lot of homework. And nevertheless, you should also be aware of the fact that Scrum is also an agile framework. It's not just any framework. So we might say that the Scrum is subset of agile. So we have different agile frameworks like in-stream programming, Kanban method, etc., etc. Nevertheless, what is also very characteristic about Scrum and agile and all other agile frameworks is that they are rather simple if you think about the number of rules. But what is also very important, they're like chess games. So it's very easy to understand the rules of chess. Nevertheless, if you want to be a good player like Garry Kasparov, probably you need many years. So it's the same with that. So it's extremely difficult to be good at agile in Scrum. Nevertheless, these frameworks are rather simple if you're thinking about understanding the rules behind them. So Scrum contains a lot of things from, let's say, mechanical perspective. Nevertheless, these ideas I mentioned before are crucial here. Nevertheless, in Scrum, we have roles, we have a product owner who is managing the product. We have Scrum Master who is managing the process. And also we have developers. Developers are, let's say, managing their own work. They are self-managing. Nevertheless, it's something like this. So maybe I will tell you a little bit more about it later. Also, we have events in Scrum, events, and I will go much deeper with that when we'll talk about collaboration, also some artifacts. But what is also very important, Scrum is extremely value-driven. So when values were added to the Scrum guide, so this is the, let's say, the Bible of Scrum enthusiasts. So 16 pages, so very small document when you have essence about what Scrum is. Nevertheless, values were added to Scrum guide, I think something like 6 years ago. And my first impression was, oh my God, what would be the next? Maybe they will start hugging trees or something like that. And they should focus on, the most important things. Nevertheless, after a few years, I realized it was a very good choice to add it, because very often people forget about values like being open, being courageous, being committed, focused, etc. And they just do so-called mechanical Scrum. So it's just mimicking Scrum, like adding roles that actually are a little bit different, adding some events, but actually we don't have much value from that. We don't really work in small batches. We don't really deliver value faster. Nevertheless, there is one thing about Scrum that is extremely characteristic of. So when I hear about Scrum, this is the first thing that comes to my head. The Scrum is focused on releasable increment. So releasable increment that is useful and thoroughly tested after each iteration. So Scrum works in iterations, let's say. So we have some period of time, like 1 or 2 weeks, something like that. But what is the crucial about Scrum? That after each iteration, we need to have a final product that is ready for release, final to some degree, of course. Nevertheless, releasable increment means that, imagine that the product owner, the manager of a product, has a big glowing red button with release me sign on it. So after the sprint, this person might just click it and everything will went to the production and users will be able to click it, touch it. So that's what Scrum is. Everything apart from that is secondary in Scrum. Okay, it's fine that we have defined roles, events, etc., but the potentially releasable increment is a key here. Okay, we can have, I don't know, dozens of releases during the sprint. It's even better. You are even more agile. Nevertheless, what is very important, in Scrum, at least once a sprint, you need to have something that is ready for release. So if you have such a situation that product owners want to press this button, of course, in metaphorical way, and nothing has happened, and you have information, yeah, we need still 1 more month. So it means that you don't work in Scrum. So this is crucial about Scrum. So yeah, so that's very important. And what is also very important, this releasable increment has to focus on value and be usable, not only releasable. So if you, for example, want to deliver a vehicle to some, I don't know, some person who lives in near the Amazonian River, some, I don't know, chief of a village or something like that. And after 1 sprint, let's imagine you just build a wheel for this person. So you are just actually you work with some design. So this is a hidden waterfall from my perspective, but in iterative way. So from this person's perspective, there is no value and you can't receive any feedback. So if you work in Scrum, you should rather work in a way that after a sprint, you have something that might be final in this situation. Okay, maybe you create a skateboard after 1 sprint. Maybe you could, after another sprint, you can add something to the skateboard. Maybe after 1 sprint, you can pivot, etc., etc. So let's imagine something very strange. So I not recommend to use Scrum to build a bridge, but let's imagine you want to do it. So if you want to build a bridge in Scrum, so after each sprint, you need to have so-called increment with usable value. So maybe after 1 sprint, you can, construct 2 poles on each side of the river and just connect them with some rope that people can use it to go to one side of another to another. And after maybe 1 sprint, you can add more poles with these ropes. And after some time, you will have a rope bridge or the thing like that. Nevertheless, what is important here, every time you have something that is usable and feedbackable. So maybe, just maybe, you can imagine that, I don't know, your users might tell that there is extremely windy and you didn't know about. So it might sound very artificial because for building a bridge, it is artificial. Scrum is not for everything. It's only for complex environment. Nevertheless, when you work with real human beings who will use your software in the future, you might be surprised how many things was only your imagination. So if you confront it with your users, they will wake you up, let's say, not this way. So what is very important? So if you work with Scrum, so I will repeat myself. I know I'm repeating myself, but this is so important. I think we need a lot of focus on that. So if you want to use Scrum, and let's say you want to build a home, so this is not the solution after 1 sprint, that you have something that is not usable. So this is the solution. So you build your product with in complete different way, in incremental way, okay? So what is also important, each sprint you have more and more value in your increment. And after some time, product owners of your product might decide, hey, it's enough. We can go to the production. And what is very important, we need to have a lot of feedback, as I mentioned before. So in Scrum, we have events, so-called sprint review. And after each sprint, or as one of the last action in a sprint, we ask our stakeholders. So stakeholders are users, some important persons, people in our project, like some managers, etc. So we ask them for feedback. So it's not only about, reporting what is the progress. So that's another thing. We'll talk about it later. But what is crucial is to know if we build the right product. So we validate our business hypotheses as fast as possible. That's the essence of Scrum, feedback from working product, okay? So, it's of course, a lot of additional complementary practice might be added to Scrum. We can do some prototype using, some paper and etc. Nevertheless, Scrum is about having a feedback from working product. So one of the last comparison between, let's say, agile and waterfall approach, or Scrum and waterfall approach, is that waterfall is more like artillery shell. So you know exactly where is the target. Maybe you need some adjustments because of wind or the stuff like that. Nevertheless, if you want to shoot the moving target, it's just impossible to use artillery shells. You need homing missile. So Scrum Agile is like homing missile. Okay. Nevertheless, nothing is for free, I'm afraid. So homing missile needs a lot of electronics, a lot of space in a homing missile rocket will be used not only for warhead, but also for different things. And it's the same with Scrum. So from economical perspective, Scrum might be a little bit worse than Waterfall. But in Waterfall, you will probably build the product that is wrong. So you will spend less money, but you will not build the right product. So Scrum is actually help you to deliver the right product, to fulfill needs and expectations. Okay. So in this Cynefin or Cynefin model, we have also chaos environment. I haven't mentioned about it before. So in this situation, we just it's a firefighting, let's say. So in this situation, it's just emergency mode. And here Scrum might not be maybe the perfect solution because, you know, in this mode, you are probably not able to predict what will you do tomorrow. So you just firefighter here. So your needs and the needs and expectation of your users might be fulfilled in emergency mode. So Craig, what do you think? Should I continue with another topic, or would you like to add something?
No, I was going to say that we are seeing Scrum being used in the public sector a lot. I think various surveys show that I think it's around 80% of the teams who are doing agile digital delivery in the public sector are using some flavor of Scrum. So it is the dominant framework. There is a question in the chat, Jakub, and I don't know if it's now might be a good chance to ask it. And it's, you've mentioned Scrum and you mentioned Kanban. You know, in 30 seconds or so, you know, what's the key differences between the two frameworks?
Oh my God! So I'm afraid I can't answer it in a few seconds. So I need a few minutes. So first of all, the problem with Kanban is that it has at least 7 different meanings. So I will start. I will just list them very, very shortly. So, you know, Japanese people are a little bit strange from my perspective. On the one hand, they're extremely pragmatic. On the other hand, they use 3 different alphabets with thousands, 10,000s of digits. So it's very unpractical. So they are also traditional. Nevertheless, if you use different alphabets, the same character might mean different word. So if you use Kanban character in hiragana, if I remember correctly, it means the, let's say, the ticket. So if you work for, let's say, for Toyota or another, let's say, car factory or car company, it means the ticket, just if you want something, so somebody might say, hey, write down Kanban for that. Okay. So the another thing, in another alphabet of Japanese language, it means a board, signboard. So what is important very often in our industry, when we say Kanban board, we mean very specific type of board. So it's a so-called board that implements pull system. Pull system is when people are just deciding when to take another item, work item. They are not pushed. So my printer is a symbol of pull system, because when it has empty space, it can take another card and print it. So nevertheless, this pull system is very characteristical. So it has beginning, it has end. And what is important, every part of the flow, every part of the of our, let's say, work has so-called work in progress limits. So we can't pull more than some number of items, in particular, a particular part of the flow. And a different thing is also that we need to have a passive and active states in the flow, because, so imagine that developers finish their works, the programmers, and want to put it to testers. So actually, they need so-called ready for testing columns, because testers should decide when to pull it. So that's what Kanban system is. So this is the third definition. Also, we have Kanban in Toyota production system. It's a Kanban used to create physical goods, physical products. Also, we have so-called Kanban method. Kanban method is a different approach than Scrum. From my perspective, it's also agile approach. Nevertheless, there you it's more evolutionary than Scrum. So Scrum is a framework, as I mentioned before. It's a skeleton. We might say that the Kanban method is like a meta framework. It's liquid, liquid, and more liquid. So you can add any roles you want, any feedback loops, any events, any artifacts. Everything is like a water. Nevertheless, it's because of that, it's extremely difficult to use it correctly. And what is also very important, it's evolutionary. So Scrum is what it is. So you have the skeleton, you have to obey all rules, and in Kanban, you start what you do now with what you do now, and you evolve. So that's the main difference.
Okay. That's fine. So maybe if people are interested, we could do another one of these sessions sometime in the future.
Yes,
and we could
course.
look at Kanban as an alternative way of tackling the same kind of challenges. Looking at the same survey and going by what I've heard in the training courses, Kanban seems to be the second most popular flavor of doing things in an agile way. If 80% or so are doing Scrum, it's usually about 20% who are doing a flavor of Kanban. And the other question in the chat, which I'm quite happy to pick up actually, Jakub, is around Scrum. Do you have to use all of the elements of Scrum, or can I pick and choose? And the way I sort of talk to companies and organizations about that is, well, if you don't use all of Scrum, then it's not Scrum. The Scrum guide, which you've mentioned earlier, is very particular about this. You use the framework in its entirety and it's Scrum. It will deliver value. However, there's no problem with just doing things like daily stand-ups. Going back to the agile principles, it talks about people working together daily, having face-to-face conversations. As a public body, you probably will still get some benefit by having daily conversations between the right people. Even though that's a Scrum event, you don't have to run full Scrum to get some value. And also managing work in terms of backlogs. That can be a useful way of living your life. I mean, I have a personal backlog of things that I need to be tackling all of the time. I don't do sprints in my personal life, but I've got a backlog of items that I know is prioritized, things that are important to be done now and things that are important to come in the future. And I suppose that's quite a nice actual segue onto the next topic, actually, because talking about backlogs are a way of managing scope and changes in Scrum, aren't they? So what about that topic then, Jakub? How do you see Scrum managing scope and changes, which was our second biggest challenge?
Yes, of course. So I will just get back to the previous topic just for a second. So you should remember that absolutely never your goal should be something like work in Scrum. So Scrum is just a tool. It's like a hammer. So if you think that hammer is good for you, you should use it. And if you have different solutions, better, you should use different solutions. Nevertheless, I'm very binary about Scrum. So you work in Scrum or not. So yeah, that's important. And also probably heard about Bruce Lee, so a martial artist that actually is not with us any longer. Nevertheless, he had approached that when you start being a fighter, let's say, first you should learn the rules, then you should master them. And the first step is to break them. And actually the big pitfall about Scrum is that some people think they understand it and they start changing the rules when they are not ready. So probably you heard about Karate Kid and Mr. Miyagi. So he said something like that: before you start flying, you should know how to walk, or something like that. Okay, so nevertheless, let's focus. So this is one of Scrum values, and I just start some of topics. So I will share my screen in a moment. Okay, so probably right now you should see my PowerPoint right again. And managing the scope and changes is very interesting according to the Scrum. So the classical approach to manage this stuff is based on, let's say, the project management. So we have three very important things. And actually, there are three dimensions that actually tell us about the success or failure. So they are scope, budget, and time. Nevertheless, so this is the project approach. Nevertheless, if we're talking about the Scrum, so the product is much higher than product. So we might say that outcomes are over outputs. So what I'm trying to say that the project is extremely valuable tool if used right, but actually in Scrum you need to focus even more on the things like value. So I know a lot of examples, I'm afraid, from my experience, that everything was fine according to the project. The product, so the scope was on time, in budget. Nevertheless, we created something that was useless. so that's a failure. If we just focus more on a product management, maybe we would just create something that is better. So project is something that supports product very well, but never can be on the first place. So what I also would like to say that if you conduct the commercial projects, so revenue is very important for you. So so-called business outcomes from producer perspective. Of course, if you work in public sector, so revenue is not always the most important. So let's say you have some. So your business objectives are a little bit different. Nevertheless, they are really connected with your citizens. I think their needs and expectations. Also, what you should measure according to the success of product, not only project, is customer satisfaction. So customer is somebody who pays, and also, the user satisfaction. So very often they are exactly the same. So yeah, so in public sector environment, usually customer is a reference to people who are just asked for some product. So probably some people from some government or the stuff like that, and users are just taxpayers. But also, what is extremely important about product success is to fulfill needs of your users. And actually, so let's imagine that I'm in London once again, and I want to use your underground, your tube, as I heard you call it this way. So from my perspective, I don't really care what was the scope of the project to create ticket machines in the area. I don't care what was the budget, what was the time. I just care about my needs. So my need is to buy a ticket fast enough. So, for example, if I need 5 minutes to buy a ticket, so probably it's not a great success. So actually, maybe I'm over enthusiast of Scrum. So actually, I checked what is the time of buying a ticket in London. So it was something like 1 minute, but I was a beginner. So from my perspective, it's just perfect. So it's really good. So the need fulfillment is much more important than the output that is inside this machine. I don't care what technology is there. I don't care about other stuff I mentioned before. Needs and expectations are important, okay? And what we can say that Scrum is extremely outcome-oriented, not output-oriented. It's also product-oriented, not project-oriented, okay? So that's important about it. So if we're talking about the scope, so we can express it in Scrum as complementary practice to Scrum, so-called user story. So it's better not to focus on technological layers. It's better to focus, on business needs and expectations. So we can construct our scope, our, let's say, work items. In Scrum, they are called product backlog items. So product backlog is a list of things to do. It's very simple. So let's have an example. So let's imagine, so I was a marathon runner, maybe not few, it was 12 years ago. Nevertheless, still I have some, positive feelings about this sport. That is why maybe I use this example. So let's imagine that I'm a marathon runner, runs again. Let's say I'm casual runner. So you can use me as a person who actually have some need, and you can express it. So what I really want, I want to be able to derive the race times from a new distance based on past times, and also some business reason, so that I can better plan my training. So we can express our scope from user perspective. So here we have some examples of not really well used usage of this method. When we have, as a programmer, I want to have a database connection so that I can end some part of the scope. So that's wrong. We also always should think about users' needs and expectations, and also we should add acceptance criteria to that. So it should be clear for developers what does it mean that they finish their feature, for example. Yeah, and we can add also some more things that can make sure them play better. what should be done. Nevertheless, in Scrum, we also use so-called sprint backlog. Sprint and also what is even more important, product backlog. So let's focus on product backlog. So product backlog is a list things to do. Very often they are just features and other things like bugs or I don't know, improvements. Nevertheless, what is important, we assume that a lot of things will change in the future according to our environment. So it's not really wise to plan, I don't know, very, let's say, in very detailed ways for, I don't know, next 2 years. So maybe you need some requirements for a few more sprints, 2 or 3. So they should be, the items should be refined very well, estimated. So some solutions should be, let's say, solved. I mean, maybe not solved, but solutions should be found before we start working, etc. So developers should say, hey, we are ready to start this work. But it's really important to remember that we should not create too much of this requirement, because if we decide to change our way of doing stuff, we might, for example, create some, do some small pivot according to the scope. A lot of things will be wasted. There is nothing more. There is nothing worse than waste of resources. So I think we should never let to do it. So in Scrum we have a really precise plan for few sprints ahead, and after that we actually allow less detail. Okay, so that's very important. And what is very important, we also should treat our feedback loops. We should always remember, we should have a radar or sonar and always check if we are going in the right direction, and maybe we could encounter some new things, and the scope, the backlog should be changed. So if we decide to create the perfect backlog for the next 2 years, sometimes it's very difficult to change it. So we might have a feeling that we spent so much time and effort on that. So we will not change it. It's a wrong attitude, I think. We should spend less and do rather it's. So in Toyota production system, there is a phrase called just in time. So I think it's a good approach here. We should not spend too much effort before it's necessary. We can postpone it, okay? So Craig, should I continue with effective planning and time management, or maybe you have something to add?
No, I was just going to look again at some of the questions that are coming into the chat, because what you've been talking about there is how you manage scope and how you deal with backlogs. And one of the common techniques that can help in that space is how we size those backlog items. So PBIs tend to have some detail in there. They tend to be negotiable and valuable, fairly independent, so that they add value and a whole range of other things. But some teams size them using different techniques. And the question in the chat in particular is about story pointing and t-shirt sizing, both valid sizing techniques. So it's saying which one is best. Do you think one's better than the other, or what's your view?
So actually, I would say, what is better, shovel or hammer? So I will answer like a consultant. It depends. So I would say that both techniques give you some information, and the question is, which information will give you better guidance to make a decision? That's the answer for this question. So sometimes t-shirt sizing is just enough. You need nothing more. You just need simple head for decision making. Should we do it or not? Sometimes you need more precise. It's a
feedback loop, isn't it? Yeah, it's a nice early feedback loop. Is something too big? Is something too small? Is something worth doing? Something that's valuable but quite small sized is worth doing. Whereas something that's not very valuable but is large sized, you might not want to do. And that's the key part. It's speed of getting to this size. Both story pointing and t-shirt sizing are quick ways of coming up with that information. Now they can be useful beyond that as well, can't they? You can use them for things like velocity. Some teams like that concept of velocity, which helps you understand how fast you are going, which again might be quite a nice segue into our next topic, which is about time management. How do we manage time effectively through Scrum and through agile techniques? So how do you think Scrum would help with that?
I will talk about story points a lot. So I see one more question. So we cannot find any user researchers. How do we capture user needs? So everything, of course. Okay, I'm I'm really monothematical, but yeah, it depends. So it depends what can you use. So sometimes you can just use a lean startup approach. So you can become a user researcher. So you can ask potential users about some feedback. But what is also very important, you will create a lot of assumptions. And no matter what, your first goal should be to validate them as soon as possible. So, the faith is really good in product management. It gives our motivation, but I believe in facts. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, the other thing on that as well, Jakub, I know in the UK we have this GDS standard, and we talk about user needs being important, but in the user-centered design community, we keep talking about user research being a team sport. You shouldn't have to rely on one person. Everybody should be involved in user research, because if you build empathy and understanding with your users, you tend to want to do a better job for them. Yeah, you want to try and help them out, and doing user research is a great way of doing that. So just in answer to the question, don't feel you need to have these people called user researchers. You should
exactly.
And must do user research yourself.
And sometimes this user research might be just connected with your product. So you can just create the first increment and ask your users. So find some potential users and ask them. But
Exactly.
Ask them to be really cruel. It's better to feel,
So,
yeah. So let's
I'm conscious of time. Yeah, I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
Time is zooming on by, which is great. And keep the questions coming in the chat, please. They do help us make sure that this is relevant to what you need. But how do you manage time then through Scrum?
Yeah, so let's talk about effective planning and time management. So guys, probably most of you heard about Shrek the ogre. So he said something like that ogres have liars. So it's the same with planning of products. So actually we can think about different time horizons of planning a product and creating a product. So first of all, we can change our plans on daily basis. So in Scrum, we try to, let's say we try to adjust our plans every day. So if we encounter new problems, we can change our, let's say, scope. Nevertheless, we plan iterations, like, for example, 1 or 2 weeks. And also we adjust a lot of things after each iteration, but also very often we have so-called releases. So some bigger chunk of value that we want to deliver to the market. Nevertheless, we create some few increments before it's ready to go to the market. Nevertheless, we still want to have as much feedback as possible. But what is also very important, in every company, we have also so-called vision and the strategy. So some CEOs have some idea about the future of the company. Nevertheless, one of the biggest issue I see in the companies is that these two parts of the onion has nothing in between. So there is so-called vacuum, let's say product vacuum. And what should be inside it, it's so-called product strategy and the product vision. So it's not that we should just do something. We should just do something that actually help to achieve company vision and business strategy. And we need particular product and vision and the strategy. So I will show you some examples. How can you create it? Nevertheless, it's huge. It's extremely important. So if you just focus only on output and you will forget about this vision and the strategy, probably you will end up with a product that is, it's cool from the developer's perspective, but actually nobody needs it. So yeah, remember about this product vacuum, because it can be lethal to product success. And if you would like to, let's say, go a little bit deeper with this topic, I encourage you to get familiar with so-called lean canvas. So every product manager, product owner, or project manager, or even developers should be aware what is their strategy. And if you are not able to answer all of these questions, you can see here probably something can be adjusted in a product vision. So Scrum is not only about working fast, but it's even more focused on working in the right direction, walking in the right direction. So it might help you. So actually Scrum contains some elements of its mechanic to actually help you to fill this product vacuum. So there are product and sprint goals. So whenever you start a sprint iteration, you should have some business outcome behind your head. Like, for example, we want to let our customer in Finland or users in Finland to buy a ticket in Helsinki. So actually, I had this particular sprint goal when I worked for Flixbus. And it should be some step ahead to create to achieve some product goal. Like, for example, we want to be the leading, I don't know, transportation company in Finland or something like that. So it's important to remember about it. And also, this product goal should be some link between vision and the sprint goal and your work in your sprint. So let's call them tactics. And what is very important about the Scrum, I mentioned about it a few times, that there are potentially releasable increments that are useful and thoroughly tested. So very often when I was a consultant, I heard from project managers that everything is fine. Project is 95% complete. We almost done. So when I also heard from them that they never ever had any kind of increments. So, a lot of things is in progress. We will have some hardening sprints. We will have some integration phase, some testing phase, etc. So, you know what, guys? I know they are in big problem, let's say. So they are not even aware that probably I will work for them soon as a person who will pull the project out of the ruin. So these increments help a lot with the progress of work. So increment actually give you the evidence. Hey, this is exactly where we are in our roadmap. Okay, that's very, very important to remember that. So very often I had this kind of complainings or this kind of problems from my customers. Like, for example, it appears that they create the application, they worked for 1 year on that, it was mobile industry, and it appears that they have a lot of negative comments on App Store because people with impaired vision can't use it. So, it's lethal for an application when it has negative comments. It can just disappear from market really soon. So if they have increment much faster and have a feedback or put it even on the production in some beta version, they would know that they have this problem. What is very important about big batch of value that is not releasable soon and feedback soon, that all of the problems you have, they're not even so probable, each of it, but there are millions of possible problems and they will materialize during the process, and you will get familiar with them very, very late. And that might be very, very difficult. Also, the product can be deployed because of a breaking bug. So actually, guys, it's a classical scenario that everything is fine. We are almost there. We just need one week to put it to the production, to integrate it. And you know what? They still need half year more than that. So it's a difficult because a lot of undone work is accumulating and they are not familiar with that. And also, writing a code takes significantly more time than expected. Everything was fine, but on paper, your Gantt chart tells you that everything is fine till it isn't. And actually, Scrum will give you opportunity to know much faster that something is terribly wrong. Okay. And okay, so that's similar. Nevertheless, what I'm trying to say right now, that's one of the most important weapons that Scrum can give you is so-called done increment. It can reduce the risk of undone work, and actually your progress is much more, let's say, valuable. You can possess on that. You can feel it like, okay, it's for granted. We are already there. There is a product. It's integrated, tested. It's released. We know absolutely everything about it. Otherwise, we might have a very big issue with real progress of work. And also, very often, we use so-called story points in Scrum. So actually, they are complementary practice to Scrum, but they are so connected that sometimes people think they are just part of Scrum. So story point is a rather simple concept. So it's just, it's not absolute value, it's a value that help you to compare two things. So for example, if something have a 1 story point, it means that it's 3 times smaller than something that has 3 story points. Okay. So this is relative value. So it can't be, let's say, translated to hours or the stuff like that. So if you have something that has 1 and you have something that is 3, so 3 means it's 3 times bigger. So it helps us to not focus on details, but things more in abstract way. And also what is extremely important here is that each developer is completely different. So one developer might spend 1 day on that, another 15 days. Still, what is important for you? What is the size of this item, not in relation to time, but rather in general? So it helps you to plan the whole team, because you can measure how many story points are burnt by each team in each sprint. So you can have you can find some trends. So right now you can see that we have a team that is very predictable. So sometimes it's like a sinus chart or something like that. Nevertheless, we can measure the last observation of the velocity, some average from 8, some pessimistic, and you can just compare. And if you don't change much in your environment, when there are no new trends in your process, probably it will happen similar in the future. Yeah, so it might help you to answer very important questions. Like, for example, when this feature, let's call it A, will be finished, will be done. So we might say, hey, this is our product backlog. So probably in the first sprint, we will do this one based on our previous velocity. In the second, probably we'll do this one. So, it's probably in the first sprint, sorry. Of course, a lot of things might change in the process. We might have some feedback loops that will inform us that everything is much worse than expected. Nevertheless, we will know it much faster, okay? And also what is extremely important, Scrum help us, or the story points compared with Scrum and increments that is just when tested, help us to predict the future about some chunk of scope of value. So we can have, for example, items that are, let's say, enough for the new release. Let's say we want to release in German market our new version of our application. So we need some new stuff, new UX, for example, or new user interface. So developers estimated these changes for 300 story points using some different techniques. So we can have some trends based on our previous velocity. So it appears right now, okay, it's 16th sprint, cool. So of course, as you can see here, after sometimes it appears that reality do not really care about our plans and we need some adjustments. So let's say in 8th sprint that we have new trends, more valuable right now. So probably it will be in 18th sprint. So Scrum help us with this prediction to some degree, of course. Of course, you should always treat it as a forecast, nothing more, nothing less. So Craig, should I continue with keeping funding, or would you like to add something?
We can move on to that. The only thing I was add, and I hear this a lot in the training courses, is that people think that is a firm forecast, a prediction, and sometimes stakeholders go away saying this team is guaranteed to deliver by this date, and it's not. It's just really important to remember that it's just an indicator. Yeah, velocity is an output of the process. It's not an input. It's not going to be a firm forecast. So just do keep that in mind when you're talking about this information in the public sector, because time is money. Yeah, it's our taxpayer money as well. So again, quite a nice chance to move on to the next topic. So how do we keep our budgets under control? How do we make sure we spend all of our money, our taxpayer money, wisely?
So one moment, please. I just need to share my screen once again. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay, so let's move on. So what is very important, so Craig mentioned about the risk management before. So in predictive approach, we need to, let's say, predict risks. just try to handle them, not to let them appear. In Scrum approach, of course, we can add these methods. Nevertheless, what is also very important, we have risk control using empiricism. So we have much more feedback loops, and we want to so-called fail fast. So sometimes I'm afraid a witness or even project manager of a project that actually it was my failure. I must say that after 100 days, it was rather small project. Nevertheless, after 100 days, it appears that we are unable to deliver it because our, let's say, technology was not good enough. So it was, I think, 12 years ago, and then artificial intelligence was not so good and we needed to use some of it. And it was terrible, actually. And it was my fault because I haven't used these potential releasable increments and I haven't started with most risky stuff at the beginning. So I would know after 1 week, hey guys, we spent money for 1 week of work of our guys, but it should be canceled right away. So what helped us with this, let's say, budget under control, we can waste much less budget when we will encounter, let's say, very, very extreme issue, extreme problem. So sometimes the project is impossible to be delivered. The product is impossible to deliver, and we can spend much less money and time on something that we are unable to build. So we will fail fast. And sometimes we will just fail fast, but it's not a death blow. It's just, knockdown for us, nothing more. So we spend just only 1 week and we can just pivot. We can do something different and success at the end. So sometimes it happened in my career. And if we just spend 2 years and then we will be aware that it's impossible to do it, so then it's much more difficult. And also what is very, very important about Scrum, it helps you to deliver value fast. So, okay, fast monetization is not always the case in public sector. Sometimes it is. So nevertheless, fast delivery help you to reduce the cost of delay. So your taxpayers will start using this application faster. So actually they're paying for you. So from their perspective, it is somehow a monetization. So they can start doing things faster. So cost of delay is lower. And also what is extremely important, Scrum gives you transparency. Transparency of how much you spent already, but what do you have after you spend it? So each sprint can be treated as some cell of budgeting. So each sprint has clear cost. So after one sprint, you know how much you spend, but also you know exactly how much you have. But you really have it. It's tangible. It's not that, this application will be done soon. We have a lot of work, but nothing works right now. Trust us. I really like to trust people, but as I mentioned before, I like evidence. Yeah, I'm an engineer, so I like trust people, but if I have some evidence, some hypothesis is just checked, is better. So I think that's the most important according to the things connected with this funding. What is also very important, so Scrum helps you with funding by showing results faster. So you can just show your stakeholders, hey, this is what we have. It's working. We will have more than that, but it is better, let's say, tool to gain trust from your stakeholders. So if you want to convince your sponsor, hey, give me 100 million pounds, and after 3 years you will see the miracle, everything will be fine. It's a little bit easier to say, hey, we need just 100,000 pounds to create the proof of concept, and then we will continue. So this person might feel, yeah, 100,000 pounds, it's still a lot of money, but it is not 100 million pounds. So it's easier to convince sponsors to find them. And actually, I remember when I worked as a consultant and I was pulling product out of the ruin. So we had exactly the same problem, that a lot of money was spent and the sponsors didn't want to spend even more. So what was our goal? To create the first increment to show them, hey, this is the result you're paying for. Okay. Okay, so let's move.
I was going to just add there, Jakub, because in the, again, coming back to the GDS standard, the way digital services are delivered, you do have these phases of delivery, discovery and alpha and beta. And again, just to echo what you're saying, these help focus your mind, focus your efforts. You should be delivering value at each of those stages. And you shouldn't be spending too much money, or you shouldn't be committing too much money. You should have enough money to get through discovery to prove there's a problem there that you can solve in an effective way. And we're just trying to manage risk. This money is precious, so we don't want to write a blank check. We want to make sure our teams are spending it on the right thing. Scrum is very transparent because you can go and see where the money's being spent. And as you were calling out, you always get a fixed cost per sprint. Yeah, a 2-week sprint, for example, with this team, the time is fixed. It's 10 working days, 2 weeks, and the team cost is fixed. It's what varies that changes. And what I have seen in the public sector as well is that there is sometimes a bit of a reluctance if there are problems to communicate those. People are a bit resistant to say, you know what, this isn't working, which nicely takes us on to the next topic. How do we keep stakeholders informed? How do we communicate as effectively as we can with the right people at the right time and the right level through Scrum? How does Scrum help with that?
So actually, I will tell even a little bit more about this collaboration. So I will tell you what Scrum actually help you with any kind of collaboration. So first of all, at the beginning of the sprint, we have so-called sprint planning. So people who are created the product will collaborate. So everybody who is involved, product owner, developers, just create a forecast. So they have the occasion to just, I don't know, check if the product goal is right, if the sprint goal is right, and they have occasion to just create a forecast for the sprint. They can use so-called daily Scrum each day to validate if they are going in the right direction, if they are fulfilling needs and expectations of the users expressed as sprint goal, etc., etc. So, but what is the most important from stakeholders' perspective? It's so-called sprint review. I mentioned about it a little bit earlier. So once again, I repeat myself, I know it, guys, but potentially releasable increment that is useful and thoroughly tested is a key here. So stakeholders see the final result is sprint. It will not be changed. Maybe things will be added to that. They can add some feedback to that. So once I was a stakeholder on a review, and I just said something like that. Hey, this is application for trainers like me, but you ask me to, or you force me to add a PDF file with some code of conduct. So I don't want to do it. So we start discussions. It appears that even different friends said that they can't add a PDF file. They like to have this code of conduct, but they are not really efficient or familiar with technology, etc. So some developers said, "Hey, let's create the textbook. People, the text edit box. People can just paste the text there, etc., etc." So if they just build it or start building it and create the final version after, let's say, half year, they will not know that they can change their direction, okay? So stakeholders are always informed by the evidence. It's not a report, it's just working software. So they can just, I don't know, download it, install it, and click it. So this is a proof. So that's how Scrum approaches according to that. So it's not that we have a Gantt chart, everything is fine according to the plan. Okay, we can actually use it. It might be valuable. But what is the most important is the proof, evidence. So this is empirical approach. And apart from that, we have sprint retrospective. So Craig mentioned about it. So this is the event, the feedback loop, where the whole Scrum team, so product owners, Scrum Master, and developers, try to find out what can they do better in the next sprint, what can they optimize about their process. So, you know, very often some people might say, hey, they are professionals, they should start working in the best way from the beginning, but not in complex environment, I can assure you. So sometimes reality might be a little bit cruel for them. So sometimes they have to figure out problems when they encounter that. So they have special feedback loop for that. So of course, I could tell you much more about it. Nevertheless, you should remember that Scrum has a lot of feedback loops that actually enhance the collaboration with everybody, okay? And also we might say that the sprint itself is a feedback loop. So it's like a sonar pulse that forces us to inspect and adapt a lot of things. And what is also very important, we should be sure that we have the right people on the board. We have all skills necessary. So, you know, in Scrum, we might say that one of the most important aspects is so-called cross-functional team. So I mentioned before, okay, probably 100,000 times that increment is key idea behind the Scrum, but you need to have a team that has skills to deliver this increment at the end of the sprint. So team should contain all skills necessary to deliver it. So it's not really good idea to have skills outside the team, because then team is is, let's say, might be doomed. So their forecasts are very often useless when they have no control on the whole process. So what is the Scrum answer for that is that the team should contain all skills necessary to deliver the increment. So in Scrum, these people are called developers, but in Scrum, it's a little bit misleading. Developer does not only mean programmer. It means programmer, but also tester, but also UX expert, if you have one, business analyst, any kind of person who actually has anything to do with creating the new increment. So once I work for Polish Ministry of Finance, and before the tests could be started, we needed to have a review from Ministry of Finance, so from business experts. So you might be surprised, but from Scrum perspective, business expert is a developer. So we pulled him to our team, and he was on dailies, retros, and actually a lot of problems were solved because of that. So he was close to us. He understood us, we understood him, and the work was much smoother. Okay, so how Scrum help us to get the right people? So increment will give you the final answer. If you are not able to create increment, it means that you have a hand on the hot stove and it's burning. So you have very fast feedback loop that you should do something about it. Okay, your team is not cross-functional. You need to get this cross-functionality into the team. So there are two main strategies for that. So one is that if team do not have necessary skills, they can just learn. They can just get these skills. And if it's impossible, like for example, business expert is a person that has some governance permissions, so we can just add missing skill or missing person to the team. So without it, I would not recommend to use Scrum. So, okay, you can do some workarounds, like have external service, like ops that actually they will serve you, etc., etc. But it ends every time in the same way. You have extremely long feedback loops. Your time of delivery is much longer than it should be. So I remember when we just matched person from ops with Scrum team, it appears that let's say potentially release increment was not created each 2 months because it was impossible for them to have it after one sprint. It was not really Scrum. It was rather some Scrum bot. We have Scrum bot. Nevertheless, when we add this person, it appears that some features can be released to the production after a few days. So small structural change a lot. Okay, so and it cost us almost nothing. So according to the main topics, that's all from my side.
Amazing. Jakub, Craig, thank you so much, and absolutely spot on time, as you'd expect from somebody who spent some time talking about the importance of timekeeping. That was absolutely brilliant. I mean, the passion with which you both speak about the subject is extremely clear. I found the energy infectious. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for providing such a practical presentation. For everybody on this call, we tasked Craig and Jakub to deliver something that was very practical. We wanted it to have real value. We know that everybody on this call has an awful lot, I imagine, on their plate, and to give up a couple of hours on a Wednesday, we wanted to make it worthwhile. And I think from what I've seen, Craig and Jakub have absolutely delivered on that. So thank you very much.